welcome everyone to Blast Point's 2022 Spotlight interview series, where we will quote unquote shine a spotlight, so to speak, on individuals and organizations using customer intelligence to become more customer centric. So today we're going to be focusing specifically on increasing customer awareness of and participation in dynamic pricing programs. So I'm Marianne Holohan, Director of Content at BlastPoint, and I'm going to be sort of your host slash facilitator. And today I'm joined by Tomer Borenstein, the CTO and co-founder of BlastPoint, also machine learning expert, as well as our first guest, Mark Brown. Mark, I'm going to go ahead and tell everybody your credentials here. Mark Brown is the Chief Customer Officer at Fayetteville Public Works Commission in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where he's worked since January 2013. Mark's responsibilities include marketing, conservation, customer service, and billing and meter services. Mark's team is responsible for developing the programs, services, and tools necessary for PWC's Fayetteville's customers to take advantage of their smart grid initiatives. Prior to joining PWC, Mark worked at DTE Energy for 23 years in progressively more responsible roles in engineering, marketing, and management. Mark has a BSEE degree from Bucknell University and an MBA in marketing from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Welcome, Mark. It's great to have you here today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Marianne. It's good to be here today. Tomer, how are you?
I'm great. Really appreciate you joining us, Mark.
All right, so we're going to get the conversation started today by talking just a little bit in general about dynamic pricing and just kind of rate design in general. For listeners who may not be very familiar with it or may have heard it in passing but don't know exactly what it is, let's talk a little bit about what exactly we mean when we're saying dynamic pricing and maybe how it's the same and different from other rate design things. So I'll let you guys go ahead and take that away. Mark, if you want to talk a little bit about that first.
Okay, I'll go first. Dynamic pricing is basically various different ways that you can pass on your cost structure to customers so that their behavior reduces costs, which benefits them and benefits all other customers because it's properly reflecting cost structure. And there are various different ways of doing that. And so it depends a lot on what your strategy is and what your cost structure is.
Mark, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. You know, dynamic pricing, time of use rates, demand response is an increasingly talked about topic in the utility space. And I wanted to get your thoughts on why do you think now is the time where we're hearing more about this and we're seeing more utilities really drive enrollment in dynamic pricing programs?
Good question. I think there's a couple of different things that are going on that's driving this. I think the first thing that's going on, and both of them are related to technology. The first thing is going on is customers' expectations are changing of their providers. All right. And in order for us to meet those expectations, we have to put tools out there that give customer choices. And the traditional ways of pricing don't really give customers a whole lot of choices. Okay, so that's the first thing that technology is driving. And the second thing that technology is driving in our industry is it's giving customer choices like rooftop solar, like batteries, all right? And that traditional pricing mechanisms don't give the customers the opportunity to take advantage of those technologies. If we have pricing structures that don't properly reflect our costs, then a battery may make sense to a customer, but not really make sense to us, or make sense to us, but really not make sense to a customer. And so we have to reflect that and how we price our product to our customers so they can take advantage of the technologies, which ultimately leads to improved customer satisfaction.
Cool.
Yeah.
You know, one more thing I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about, just so that the people who are less familiar with dynamic pricing programs can really get a crisp idea of what it looks like. What is the end user experience from the consumer perspective when they're engaged with, for example, PWC as part of your dynamic pricing programs?
I think I'll start with the residential customers. The residential customers, we have mandatory time of use pricing. We have two-tier time of use pricing. So our on-peak hours, which are 4 hours a day that vary seasonally, is 13 cents a kilowatt hour. And then all our off-peak hours, all the rest of the hours, including holidays, is a little bit over 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's like a 35% premium for the on-peak hours. And so what that does is it gives customers choices. And I like to say they have customer choices between cost and comfort. So if you want in the wintertime, if you want your house to be a little bit warmer, you can choose to set your thermostat higher and pay more during the higher on-peak hours. But if you want to save money, you can set your thermostat down, maybe wear a sweater or whatever you want to do, and then save some money by then heating only in the cheaper time. And so it gives you a choice between comfort and cost. It gives you a choice between convenience and cost. So when you look at things like that, you do have some choice about when you do them. Okay, when do I run my dishwasher? When do I run my clothes washer? When do I want to run my clothes dryer? And so if you want to be able to run those things when you want to run them, then you're choosing to pay a little bit more to get that convenience. And if you want to pay less, then you're going to sacrifice convenience. I'm going to not run the dishwasher right after I do the dishes, put the dishes in there. I'm going to wait until after the on-peak hours to make that decision. And so customers love choices. And all the CEOs that I've worked for here have always said, let's give our customer choices. And that's what the time of use pricing does for us.
I love that. Thank you.
Thanks so much for explaining that. Now that we kind of have a sense of, why this is so important and how it kind of helps utilities give customers more choices, let's talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about some dynamic pricing benchmarks that BlastPoint worked to establish this last year. So we were really curious about what dynamic pricing enrollment looked like for utilities across the United States. So we took a deep dive into some data, as we are inclined to do, and it's self-reported data from utilities from 2020. And we kind of came up with a few insights that we think are important for kind of getting a glimpse of where we're at in the US with dynamic pricing. So over on the left, you can see average enrollment percentages for dynamic pricing in the US. So some things that we noticed, and when we looked at this data, we divided them into IOUs, municipal utilities, and co-ops. And then we also looked specifically at the three major customer types, so residential, commercial, and industrial. So one of the big insights that we saw was that across the board, essentially, industrial customers are the ones who are most engaged with dynamic pricing. So I believe all three of those categories, we saw industrial as the top category. So for municipal utilities, that's 45% of industrial customers enrolled. 31 for co-ops and 25% for IOUs. And we also saw a hotspot in the Midwest, particularly for those industrial customers, which, those of us from the Rust Belt can feel very, very proud about. On the other hand, IOUs stand out as having the highest median residential enrollment at 10%. For those other two categories, residential enrollment is lower. So for municipal utilities, residential is about 3%, and for co-ops, 5%. So kind of interesting to think about that, just in terms of what this means for customer choice, right? So it seems like, based on what you said, Mark, customers love choices, but it seems like if we look at this from like a bird's eye view, there's a lot of work, I think, that maybe utilities can do across the US to try to get more customers engaged in these programs. One thing I will point out, though, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to invite Mark to talk to us about this, is that we looked at the top 10 in every category, and we saw that for municipal utilities, that Fayetteville PWC is in our top 10. And I think you actually have even increased your enrollment since then, right, Mark?
Yeah, we made a change in, I guess it would be 2020, that made all of our rates have a time of use component in them now.
Yeah. So we wanted to, because of this, because, you know, we know you and work with you, we wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about, you know, what is it about your situation that allowed you to do this in such a successful way? So I'll turn it over to you and you can talk to us a little bit about the background of Fayetteville PWC and, you know, how you got to this point with dynamic pricing.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. Before I start there, I would like to add something about the industrial,
Sure.
why the industrial time of use enrollment is much higher. And again, that goes back to technology. The meter capabilities to do time of use pricing, which means you have to have interval data for every 15 minutes or every hour, okay? With the older meter technologies, particularly the analog meter technologies and the one-way communication technologies, okay? The places where meters that could capture the data necessary for dynamic pricing, the technology and cost only supported them in industrial customers, okay? With the new AMI technology, which is now two-way communication, and we have interval data, hourly interval data for all of our electric customers and all of our water customers. Okay, and the cost has come down to be able to provide that. So that's a necessity if you're going to do any kind of dynamic pricing. You have the customers in question have to have meters that allow you to see that information and use that information in your billing. And so with our AMI deployment, that's where we're at, and I think that's why you see the others lagging behind the industrials with adoption rates on that. So anyway, the main thing about this is that PWC has a special legal status in North Carolina. We're an independent public authority. We're the only independent public authority in the state of North Carolina. So therefore, as such, we're governed by 4 commissioners that are appointed by City Council, okay? Those commissioners operate and manage the assets that are titled in the name of the city of Fayetteville, but they have pretty broad control over those assets, okay? They have full rate-making authority. There's a few things related to renewable energy requirements that the North Carolina Utilities Commission has authority over us, okay? But our commission has full rate-making authority. So those 4 commissioners who are appointed, not elected, okay, appointed, and are business people that come with business backgrounds, are able to make rate-making authority for business-related decisions, okay? And since we've had that rate structure as a public authority in place for about 6 years now, but since 1905, our commission has had full rate-making authority. And you can see that our rates are among the lowest in the Southeast, and they're the second lowest in North Carolina because we've had the ability to make business decisions to try and keep our rates low, all right? Apologize for that. So that's the reason we can do it. That's the why we can do it. Why we are doing it, okay, ties in directly to the nature of the power supply agreement that we have with our utility. We buy all of our energy, except for a few minor exceptions, from Duke Energy Progress, which is one of the Duke Energy companies in North Carolina, all right? And the nature of our price signals that we get from Duke lead us to say that dynamic pricing makes sense to us. And we're on what's called a 12 coincident peak contract. What that means is every month there's 1 hour where every kilowatt hour that we sell for on average about 10 cents a kilowatt hour costs us $20. And I'll say that again. Everything that we sell for 10 cents for 1 hour costs us $20. All the other hours of the month, every kilowatt hour we sell for 10 cents costs us less than 3 cents. So when you look at that very clear price signal, that says there's an opportunity to do something about that. The question is, how do you do it based on the customer demographics and how you want to reach our customers? Okay, and so that's what's driving us to do this. All right, and I'll just go back a little bit. I'll talk about that in a second. Go back. If you can go back to, I think it was around 2009 when we signed the agreement that would take effect in 2012. All right. And we knew that we were going to have this price signal. And you can look at our strategic plan that said, we want to give customers choices. Okay. We want to update all our IT systems to support this. We want to install AMI metering to support this. And we want to do a lot of other things like outage management systems and other things that are going to give our customer choices and provide a higher level of service. The decision to go AMI metering to upgrade our IT systems was based not on saving money, but improving the customer experience. All right. And so when you look at time of use rates, okay, that's one thing that does that this price signal facilitates, because there's opportunity for customers to save money because we have this price signal. Okay, now you can go to the next slide, Marianne. Thanks. All right, so we have mandatory time of use rates, and they're basically what I just described. On peak, about 13 cents a kilowatt hour. Off peak, about 8 or 8.5 cents a kilowatt hour. It's true for all our residential customers, all for our small commercial and industrial customers. They have those prices. Okay, the small commercial industrial stops at about 30 kilowatts. So those are fairly small customers. The medium commercial industrial customers, all the way from 30 to 1,000, they have the same time of use window, but they have a different price signal because their rate is structured differently. There, the on-peak energy cost is 5 cents and the off-peak is 4.5 cents because the rate structure is different, okay? But the hours are the same. Our summer hours, which are April to October, it's from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. in the afternoon, okay? That's the time in the summertime when both the residential market and the non-residential market are using energy at the same time. In the afternoon in the summertime, the residential market is starting to come home, starting to cook dinner, starting to turn the air conditioning systems on, okay? The business market is still operating, okay? And people are still at work, and that goes on until about 7, until everybody sort of gets home. And now you're in a market where mostly residential, the business load has dropped down and the peak load decreases, all right? In the wintertime, and that's November through March, it's the same thing happening at the other end of the day. Now the two markets are using energy the most because it's cold in the morning, and now it's being driven by cold, and people are getting up in the morning and get ready to work. At the same time, the building I'm in right now is turning the heat on so that when people come in, the building is up to temperature. And so between 6 to 10, that same transition period ends up in the system peaking. And that's why those are our hours, all right? If you look at that 1 hour a month, in the summertime, it almost always happens on weekdays between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. In the wintertime, it almost always happens weekdays, hour ending 8 o'clock. So there's some level of predictability, but it does move. In fact, so far this year, in March of this year, the peak happened Saturday morning. Still got a few more weeks to go. And March is toward the end of the wintertime. That was a morning peak. It's very possible if it gets to be 85 degrees here sometime between now and the end of March, we might have an afternoon peak in March. So those kinds of things that go on. The shoulder months are the hardest to predict because the weather is so unpredictable, as you can tell. And then all the other hours are off peak. Okay, we have a mandatory coincident peak rate for our large commercial and industrial customers. Anybody who has a single meter that has a load 1,000 kilowatts or greater, or if you have multiple service points on the same site that aggregate to 1,000 kilowatts, you can be on, you can have to be if it's greater than 1,000 on 1 meter, and if you want to be, if it's a sum of greater than 1,000, you don't have to be for any meters that are less than 1,000, but you can if you want to aggregate meters on the same site. All right, and so that rate actually for most of those customers, that 1 hour cost we pass directly through to them. There's no contribution margin on it. It's just we pass that cost directly through. Whatever we pay, they pay. And then most of them have an energy price that's that incremental energy price plus some contribution to fixed cost in there. All right. And then our largest customer, which is a 25 megawatt customer, we pass both the coincident peak price through to them and the specific energy price through to them. And our contribution margins is all collected through a basic facilities charge. And the goal there was to make their incremental cost of production as low as we could make it to help them be competitive in producing. All right. We have, 2 years ago, we set up an optional coincident peak rate that says if your demand is greater than 200 kilowatts, that you can go on a coincident peak rate, okay? We didn't have very many people choose that rate, but we're going through an electric cost of service study now, and we're revisiting the costs associated with that rate. And we plan to make that coincident peak rate mandatory. We haven't decided on the threshold. It's going to be around 200 kilowatts, mandatory for everybody starting a year from this July. So we'll announce what the rate is going to be. We'll say you can go on it at this threshold, okay? And we're going to give you 1 year to prepare for that, so that you have a time, which is the same thing we did with our residential time of use rates. We spent 1 year explaining it to customers before it went into effect, so they would understand and we could give them some tools to work with it.
Yeah, I think that was one thing we were going to ask you about, Mark. How to prepare customers for something like that. What was your experience with that?
So we decided that we knew that making time of use mandatory, and our customers had never even seen an optional time of use rate before, that would take some adjustment. So the decision, when the commission decided to implement it, we really had about 15 months, because they decided, I want to say in February, and then in May of the next year, the time of use rates went into effect. And so we used that time to develop a thermostat rate, a water heater control rate, to develop some tools, calculators on our website to show people how they could save money doing those things. We provided a lot of communication information, magnets to go on the refrigerator that communicated the hours, obviously mass media communications, in magazines, in newspapers, on billboards, to get that information out there over a year. And as a result of that, we essentially had nobody really push back when the time of use rates went into effect, because we had explained it to them. We went out and met with community groups and talked to them and helped them understand how things were working. So we really did not have any pushback when we implemented it, because we took the time to explain it and help the customers prepare for it.
Mark, do you feel like this is an ongoing initiative to educate, new customers that you onboard? I know that you guys have a fairly high customer turnover, just because in your area people move in and out. It's a military town. Now that people are coming in and this is already the status quo, is that still something that you have to worry about and address?
Yes, absolutely. I think, so let's just talk about the residential things. All right. We still are communicating regularly. So like when November came and we transitioned to winter hours, in the month of October, we communicated to everybody, remember, starting November 1st, you're going to go on to winter hours. And here's what the winter hours are. And here's the kinds of things you can do to save money during the winter hours. And now it's March, and I haven't seen the actual communications, but I'm sure we're getting ready to communicate to our customers on April 1st, we're going to the summer hours. And now this is when that is. And here's the kinds of things you can do to save money during the summer hours, because they may be different. And the when you do it is different. We have several incentive programs for Wi-Fi enabled thermostats. So if you leave your home in the morning and forgot that you wanted to change it to an afternoon setting or a morning setting, you can do that wherever you're at, because everybody has a smartphone, right? And so we're building the tools to allow customers to take advantage of those rate options. The other thing that's going on, we are in the process of finishing up our electric vehicle master plan, and I know you guys have talked to our EV team that's working on that. Our plan for the EV, okay, is to create an optional rate for EV vehicle owners. That's a 3-tier rate, okay, that would have, and we intentionally decided to keep the first 2 tiers the same, and then to create a lower 3rd tier, and to move some of the contribution that was in that 3rd tier to basic facilities charges now, so that people who get an EV don't see a change in the things that they did during the other hours, how much that's costing them, so that they, so if you're heating at a certain temperature, you're not going to pay more, because the rate to do that is the same, okay? But now you're going to get like about a 4.5 cent per kilowatt hour EV charging rate from about 8 o'clock in the evening until about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning that avoids those coincident peak hours. And we think that's a very attractive rate to get people to encourage people who want to look to EVs to say, hey, look, you can save even more money. That's going to help you pay for any increased cost you have associated with putting a charging system in, those kinds of things. And we're also looking at some kind of an incentive program that would allow us to work with the charging systems so that if everybody decides they want to charge their vehicle at the same time, we don't have to replace our electric infrastructure, that we can work to reduce, not to stop them from charging, but to reduce the rate that they're charging, balancing that between the people who are on the same transformer so that we don't have to go in and spend a lot of money, which would raise rates to replace all that infrastructure. And so our plan is, and our AMI metering and our technology will allow us to do that. And we're working right now to figure out, how do we know which devices we should be comparing to the transformer, and how are we going to figure out whether that transformer is overloaded or not, so that we should implement that. So again, allowing customers choices, but then also trying to keep our rates low by using the technology to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like dynamic pricing for your company has really kind of opened up a lot of avenues for giving customers more choices and for becoming actually more customer centric in that way.
Right.
And I feel like that might be a good bridge to our final piece here, which I'll turn it over to you, Tomer, for this, to talk a little bit about how customer intelligence can help.
Sure. So, in PWC's case, where they are an independent public authority, they have the option to make time of use rates mandatory. But in a lot of cases, that's not how it goes. And customers have to opt in and enroll in these sorts of programs. Even in the case with PWC, we do have to make sure that customers are aware that that they have these options and that this is how the rate is structured. So, a little bit about customer intelligence is that utilities are beginning to more and more turn to data and artificial intelligence to help them better engage with customers, understand them better, and motivate them to enroll in certain programs like this. On the screen here, we have a case study from a Midwestern utility with about 500,000 customers who, they are an investor-owned utility. They did not have the ability to just make these kinds of dynamic pricing rates mandatory. And what they did in their case is use, in this case, BlastPoint's customer intelligence platform to drive several campaigns around their EV rebate programs as well as their dynamic pricing programs, and saw in under a quarter a 28% increase in dynamic pricing. They did that by understanding which customers are most likely to enroll and what are the best ways to engage with those customers, through which channels and what kind of messaging would resonate with them. And of course, the results speak for themselves. I think this is a great example of how utilities can use data and AI to get customers more engaged, give customers more choice. And this is something that's important, especially if you can't make time of use rates mandatory. But even in the case where you can, like in Mark's case in PWC, there's still a lot that you can do to make sure, hey, these are the customers that are most likely not aware. We can't hit everyone. So by understanding customers' usage patterns, technology preferences, channel preferences, we can make sure that the folks that might have missed the memo are aware and prepared to use these choices that are provided.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like part of it, like you were saying, Mark, is that education piece. I think that a lot of the time, especially residential consumers, aren't always aware of how something like this can really change their relationship with energy and also their bill. So it seems like, one thing that customer intelligence can help with is saying, here are the folks in your customer base who, maybe right now they're not interested in this, but maybe here's some things that you can do to reach out to them to help them become more interested. And here are the channels that they're engaged with. So here's how you can make sure that they're actually going to see that.
Yeah, Marianne, the thing that excites me about working with BlastPoint is that we I was on the board of the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative for a number of years, and we did a lot of research around segmentation about when you're working with your energy provider, what aspects of that service are you most engaged with? Okay, because engagement is the key to what you're trying to do. And we created, segmentation plans, and PwC participated in 2019 in Electricities of North Carolina customer satisfaction survey that brought the results back to us about which of these segments our customers were in. And one of the things that really excites me is about the second largest segment we have, which is about 28 or 29% of our customers are primarily engaged with their energy supplier on environmental issues. All right. And we had never really done specific things targeted to that. Since that time, we've done a few things, but the idea of identifying specifically who those people are and targeting messages that they will be receptive to, that we are doing or getting ready to do. Okay, I mean, if you talk about somebody that's environmentally engaged, if you can talk about our time of use rates and how it's reducing consumption at the highest peak times as far as fossil fuel usage, okay, and so you can say that by reducing your energy, you're saving the carbon footprint, then you can address them and they'll be more engaged in your time of use rate. And they'll be more engaged in what you're trying to do with EVs, be more engaged in what you're trying to do to support rooftop solar and batteries. So all of those things, knowing what the customers are interested in, we can then target much more effectively the information that they want to see about the things we're doing that will help them get what they want, which drives our customer satisfaction.
Absolutely.
I think your insights, Mark, around customer satisfaction and engagement being tied directly to giving consumers more choice is really key, and something that other utilities should really, see you guys doing and approach the same way. I think you guys have done a great job, since the late 2000s, right? You've had this plan, you've been putting it together, and we can really see the effects of that with how you are engaging with your customers and the response that you've got from your existing customers so far.
Yes, and we're hoping to do more. There's a lot more things we can do, especially working with some of the things that Last Point allows us to do. So,
absolutely,
yeah, absolutely. Well, our time is up for today. Mark, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this, sharing the story of your company and how you have managed to make this work for you. And seems like you have some great outcomes there. If anyone listening is interested in learning more, you can download our 2022 Sustainability Benchmarks report, where you can learn more about dynamic pricing benchmarks, as well as other aspects of sustainability as well. If anyone wants to know more, if you have questions, feel free to email us. We'd love to talk more about dynamic pricing and how to move forward with that. Again, Mark, thanks so much. And we are signing off. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It's good to see you both. Take care.